Hello and welcome to The Well. I'm your host, Dr. Brendan Arm, Doctor of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine, Chinese medicine herbalist, and founder-director of Lotus Integrative Medicine in Santa Monica, California. There's a wealth of health-related information out there, and I'm joined today by this wonderful group of integrative and holistic medical doctors and practitioners to share some of our favorite wellness tips. Please let me introduce you to Bianca Rodriguez, a holistic psychotherapist, Dr. Heath McAllister, a naturopathic doctor and registered herbalist, and Leona West, a clinical nutritionist and herbalist, also trained and certified in functional medicine. So let's begin. Today's topic is vitamin D and your health.
So you guys, the UK has sent out vitamin D to every nursing home and every person over 70 for the next 4 months to take them through fall and winter. So this is pretty huge. I mean, this is the biggest recognition, on a stage of a country, recognizing the importance of vitamin D in relationship to immune system, in particular respiratory viral infections, and based on just the overwhelming research. I mean, interestingly enough, even a few months ago, there was some really prominent integrative physicians in communication around social media that was even being suppressed or censored by even suggesting vitamin D while we were all trying to get the word out. So this is pretty huge move. What do you guys think about this?
I'd be kind of curious to know, what's the pharmacological effect of vitamin D? How does it boost the immune system, or what is the agenda behind using vitamin D? Because I'm more of an ambassador of Chinese medicine, so I'd be really kind of interested to hear from McAllister or Leona about, of course, Bianca. But any and all, I'm like, what's the story behind vitamin D?
Vitamin D really should be properly termed a hormone. It's really not so much of a vitamin. It has so many different functions in the body. It has many different interactions in the immune system, but generally speaking, in a general way, it's going to activate or stimulate or make your immune system more robust, particularly, your white blood cells, your macrophages, your neutrophils. Those are, the different lymphocytes. Those are some of the different types of white blood cells that go after pathogens and viruses and bacteria. They've found correlation studies for the benefits of vitamin D are broad reaching, so broadly we can say that your overall immune function is better when you have a normal vitamin D status. And from a natural perspective, typically, naturopathic doctors consider, anywhere between 60 and 80 to be an optimal range of vitamin D. Whereas if you look on a lab
60
testing,
to 80,
vitamin D can be lower than say 30. And still, 35 and still be considered normal. And to us, that's really suboptimal. So that having a proper vitamin D status means that your immune surveillance is higher. It also means some other things that not only does your immune system protect you against things like viruses and bacteria, but it also protects you against growth of cancer cells. That in the initial stages of cancer, your immune system is supposed to identify and gobble up cancer cells. And if you have good vitamin D status, you have lower incidence of getting cancer, of any kind of cancer. You also have a lower incidence of having autoimmune conditions. So it's like an immune regulator. It also, in a really reductionistic way, helps us absorb calcium from our diet and does so many other things in the body. Technically, a vitamin is something you're not able to manufacture internally, and you have to take it orally or eat it somehow. Vitamin D you can get for free in the sun. So that's why it's technically not a vitamin. It has so many other functions as a hormone. But they found in correlation studies that people that have the higher vitamin D status have the lower mortality rate for things like COVID. But that's also the case for other viral infections like influenza, and just that overall immune robustness comes with having good vitamin D status.
I have a question.
So do I, but go for it.
Okay. There must be a correlation then between cold and flu season being during the darker parts of the year when we don't get as much vitamin D. And then in summer, I feel like that's not really cold and flu season when we're spending more time outdoors. Is there something going on there?
There's definitely a correlation, but it's not the only factor. So when it's colder out, your immune surveillance is already a little lower. Your circulation is a little lower, right? You're also crowding into buildings, and you're having more community acquired exposure. So there's a lot of factors, but yes, you're absolutely right. Vitamin D, even in, equatorial, even along the equator, well, maybe the equator, let's take that out of it because it's the same year round, but even in like Southern California, let's say, if you were to sunbathe 10 minutes a day from 10 till 2, which is kind of the optimal sunlight times, you're still probably not going to manufacture enough vitamin D. So to get enough vitamin D on those off seasons is really tough. So, that's definitely a factor. The community crowding is a factor. There's several different factors, but absolutely. And it's been proposed that vitamin D is one of the main factors with like affecting people in like a seasonal mood disorder way, like they call seasonal affective disorder. I think it's multifactorial. I think vitamin D is one factor. I think the physical exposure to light and that brightness is also a factor that affects people's mood. So I'm sure Bianca, Leona, you have some feedback about that as well.
I do, but I want to hear what you think about the SAD disorder, Bianca, and I'd love to talk about it from a nutritional standpoint, but what's your experience in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, what I notice is that, folks that have a predisposition to depression in general seem to be people who are more likely to suffer from seasonal affective disorder. And seasonal affective disorder is just kind of what's classified as a major depressive episode, which is basically, right, a list of many symptoms, including difficulty, maybe fatigue, difficulty concentrating, low mood, maybe feeling some kind of worthlessness, sleep disturbances, all that type of stuff that kind of categorizes depression. But it happens in conjunction with the changes of the season for people with seasonal affective disorders. It usually starts fall, winter, and we see over the course of a few years for people when we're diagnosing this, usually it takes like a few years to be like, oh, wait a second, my mood and all these symptoms seem to show up every year around, September, October, November, December. I have clients where like some of them are very early, I don't know if it's part of it's the psychology of knowing that the depression is coming. It's earlier in the year. Some people it's like, bam, in the middle of, it's been dark and they live on the East Coast for, it's been dark for 2 months. So yeah, it's basically depression that has a cyclical nature to it connected to the seasons. But I would love to know, what is the physiological nutrition-y stuff that goes with that?
Well, so definitely the thing about sun exposure is we certainly are getting the vitamin D, and we do have enough. When we are getting sun exposure, we have to have enough body surface exposure. So you want to have the equivalent of a tank top and shorts or less in order to really get the sun exposure. And just as a side note, you don't want to have just taken a shower because you want to get some of your natural oils to help get that vitamin D as well. So even when we are getting some sun exposure, maybe in the winter, we're not necessarily getting it in a tank top and shorts. I mean, maybe in Southern California, some of us are sometimes. But the thing about light exposure is it's also helping release serotonin and norepinephrine, all these neurotransmitters, that dopamine. So it's like this commingling of D and the release of neurotransmitters that just comes together in terms of an immune boost as well as a brain boost. So I think it's just this incredible combination of all of those. Although I don't know if you have some of your patients that use light boxes, because sometimes just even using more light can really relieve those kind of mood dips that occur. And I've noticed that if we really go in and optimize vitamin D through supplementing, that people will notice that their levels of depression will really drop during the fall and winter. So I think that supplementing, if you don't know your levels, then the kind of assumed safe supplementing amount would be 2,000 IU, but if you have any kind of deficiency, you're really going to have to be at 5,000, and in some cases a little bit higher. From a food standpoint, because vitamin D is really more like a hormone instead of a vitamin, there's not a lot of food sources of vitamin D. The best source is a lot of fish. In particular, salmon and sockeye salmon in particular has really high vitamin D. if you guys like salmon roe or like fish eggs, really rich in vitamin D. Some pasture dairy has a little bit of D, and some mushrooms have D. So ultimately, it's one of those things that we think about it because it says vitamin. We think, oh, we can get it from diet. But ultimately, like Dr. McAllister said, it's really something that we need to get from sun. And we just don't experience the sun like we did 100 years ago, but we still need that type of sun exposure. So that kind of makes me think about environmental medicine. How can we get medicine from our environment? How can we give the human body what it needs, even though we're kind of living in, a different way than what the body still needs from, hundreds, even thousands of years ago.
I want to add just a little food for thought on this one. We're talking a lot about some of the challenges that come during the winter time when there's not enough sun out, when the weather is getting colder, when maybe our vitamin D levels start to drop a bit. But as the local ambassador here for Chinese medicine, there is this yin and yang of life. There's the yin and yang of the whole year. What I mean by that is, when we go into these fall or winter months where it's colder and there's more darkness out and there's probably less sunlight that we're taking into our body, our vitamin D levels may drop, but there's probably also an opportunity here because there's not as much yang. Yang is more the spring and the summertime with more light, more vitamin D, more being extroverted and out and socializing. During the winter time or fall and winter time, is more of a yin or restorative time. It's the time of year perhaps where we're unconscious or we're sleeping more, or we should be sleeping more. It's the time of year where maybe we don't have as much sunlight on our body and we don't do as much, connecting with other people and socializing. But instead we kind of turn in and start to connect more with ourselves and do more socializing or internal work, within ourselves as a spiritual practice. So, I find it from a Chinese perspective, it's the time where we harvest and we start to store our own energy and our essence. So if we, during these months, half the year, start to turn in and do more meditation or more sleeping or contemplative work or journaling or really working on the relationship, not with the outside, all the other people or all the outside, but more the relationship of the inside in our inner work, there's an opportunity there. And maybe there's something of a drop of vitamin D at this part of the year and more introspective work. Just a thought.
That. I love that. I love talking about the seasons and how the seasons impact our being. And I do think it is a beautiful time. I think SAD, seasonal affective disorder, kind of got popular sometime in the last 10 years, just in the sense that there was a lot more media around it. And it is an actual diagnosis that we recognize, and it is really difficult for people. But knowing that, it should be assessed by a clinician because it really has to do with your level of functioning. So if you're a person who just feels a little bit more like sedentary, you feel, like you want to turn inward and maybe not be doing as much stuff, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're depressed. That could just mean, man, you are just in tune with the rhythms of nature. But if you're having difficulty functioning in your life, your relationships are struggling, you can't go to work, you're not getting out of bed, you lost weight, all that type of stuff, then there could be something more going on. So I think there's really there's like a level of, what are those called when things go across like this?
Spectrum.
There's a spectrum. That's why I need you guys.
I would also say that, in terms of winter, at least not in Southern California, but in a lot of places in the country and the world in wintertime, you may have less exposure to nature. Like you might not be going out and hiking in the snow, or you might be getting less fresh air, less nature exposure. Both the Japanese and the Germans have, recognized that there's a thing that like basically bathing yourself in nature and the health benefits of being outside around green things and other biota, plants and things, and that there's a benefit to that. And probably we're getting less of that when it's in wintertime, and we might be getting less exercise. If the weather's not great, you might not want to exercise as much. Right now it's tough to go to the gym. Arguably, it may not be a good idea to go to the gym. And when it's cold outside, you might not want to get out and exercise. So there's so many different factors involved beyond vitamin D that I think we're maybe connecting less to our environment. And that's also a factor in seasonal affective disorder. Just like, a lack of human connection can be a real problem, say during COVID times, lack of human connection has led a lot of people to feel much more isolated and depressed and anxious. So that, I think it's important for us when we think about what nourishes the body, thinking about what we can draw from our environment that also nourishes us, including the sun.
Well said.
Definitely.
Well, that's all the time we have today. If you have a topic you'd like to learn more about, let us know with a comment on social media. And also don't forget to subscribe to our The Well YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us, and please join us next time for more wellness tips. Remember, regardless of where we are, our resources in The Well are limitless.